Welcome back. Another edition of Talking Ball. It's Jack and JD, and Duke is still dancing, which means we've got at least one more game. And now we are going to preview the Sweet 16 matchup here with Duke taking on Arizona. It's a rematch of a game really early on in this season. So there are a couple of things we might be able to pull from that, but I think there's a lot that both teams have changed, even though most of the players are the same. Well, we're gonna get into that. How Duke's changed, how Arizona's changed a little bit, and also this could be Duke. It is. It's not going. It could be. It's Duke versus Caleb Love in the NCAA tournament again. So that's going to be a big storyline, I'm sure, from the national media. But JD, what's the first thing that you think about for this game coming up with Arizona?
That we're dancing. Yep, we're still dancing. That's what it matters. 2 down. And all we think about is the third game. And Duke versus Arizona. Caleb Love. Boy, did he have a good game against Oregon.
He sure did. 29 points, 5 3-pointers. Arizona started that game off down 19-4. And it seemed like Oregon. Now it was early. That was the first 5-6 minutes, but it seemed like Oregon. They certainly punched first, and they hit him in the mouth, to use the boxing expression. But it was really impressive the way Arizona was able to fight back in that game. They got it to it's like a 1-point Oregon lead with like 4 or 5 minutes to go in the first half, if I remember that correctly.
Well, then it jumped to 32-31. I don't know if that was the halftime score, but that's when Arizona took the lead at
Right.
30-31. And honestly, it was not 1 point again until very late in the game when it got to 81-80.
Yes. For Arizona, to your point, to be down 19-4 in the first 5 or 6 minutes, and then not only come back and make it a close deficit, they took the lead by the end of the first half,
Yep.
which is that was impressive to see that happen. It shows a lot about their growth as a team. They were second or third, I think, in the Big 12 conference this year, behind Houston and Texas Tech. And they got a lot better since the Duke game. So did Duke. Don't get me wrong. But they've got a lot better. They've got some different lineup configurations and some different guys to go to. And I think for me, the place I want to start with is I said after the Baylor game, Duke, we had a lot of problems with offensive rebounds and 50-50 balls. And I said, thankfully, I think half of that was Norchad Omier and his offensive rebounding, his impact. And I said, thankfully, we won't have to see Norchad Omier again. Unfortunately, we kind of do. We've got to go up against Tobi Aaka, who had, let's double check here really quickly, 14 rebounds, including 5 offensive rebounds in their game against Oregon in 22 minutes. He is just a monster on the glass. And so
How big is he, Jack?
that's a good follow-up question. He's similar size to Norchad Omier. He's 6'8", 240. So Kaman Malawach and company get to take the lessons they learned from going up against Norchad Omier and immediately apply them in the next game. So that's the positive spin, right? They just saw this matchup. Now I think a lot of that is a lot easier said than done because it's not so much a skill thing, it's a strength thing. And Kaman Malawach can't, go bench press for the next 3 days and make up the strength difference with Tobi Aaka. But he will know he'll have some things to build off of from the matchup with Omier.
Right. And I think that your point is that Malawach is only 18. And he was playing against Omir, who was, I think you said, is 24.
It's 23 or 24. I can double check.
That's not all right. 23. He's good 4 years older than him, 4 or 5 years older than him. 5 years, let's say.
Yep.
In which case, all we have is the strength that Mal has now. And we know that his size will be helpful in terms of his reach, but he is vulnerable to the very strong guys. I'd like to see Mal in 5 years, see what he looks like, but that's not the guy we have on Thursday night at 9:37. This is going to be a late one. I'm going to have to. I probably will have to get a nap in early in order to get up there to be there till the end of the game, which we'll be on our show till 1 in the morning.
I I feel like that's conservative because how many times when this is scheduled the way it is, we see the 9:39 tip off time, right? But how many times does it actually tip off then? Typically, the first game goes longer, and the tip off time ends up being somewhere between 10 o'clock and 10:15. And if there's overtime, we could be looking at 10:30. So I know, it's we're not in the ACC tournament. We don't get, I think merit based scheduling. These are TV based schedules that we have now, and I get they want Duke, to put them in the prime time slot. But I'm with you, JD. Like I certainly wish this was the 7:10 tip off or 7:09. They're very specific on their tip off times.
Well, one thing that, for Mal, he's going to need all of his strength. And we can't afford one of those like, hey, I got a little drain, so I chugged some Gatorade and I went out on the court and we know what happened. So with a 10 o'clock start, let's make certain that someone like Mal and everyone else, but we know that Duke is going to regulate their eating and everything for a late game. And
Well,
it's going to be a late game.
speaking of eating, Con Knipple on the recent podcast mentioned he doesn't eat pregame, and I wonder if he's going to have to make an adjustment here for the 9:40 or 10 o'clock tip off and have to actually eat, a dinner. I think maybe because there'll be more time before a standard tip off time, he won't be as nervous, but he could it could affect his play.
I do want to say, for those of you new to the show, we don't typically spend the first 5 minutes talking about what the Duke players should be eating before the game. But for those of you that have been with us all year, we know that these are actually issues because we are Duke fanatics, and that a late night game means they've got to think about how they're going to hydrate, how they're going to eat, what they're going to do. And we know there's going to be all kinds of adrenaline going on as well. So, sitting around and waiting for that second game has got to be tough. It's just got to be tough.
And you've got to watch, the Alabama BYU game, and it's got to be really hard on a personal level to watch that game and then just put it out of your mind. And I think ideally they probably don't watch the game. They show up on the bus, probably are, closer to the at least like halftime, right? And then they're in the tunnel. So they've watched the end of it, but they don't really watch the full game. The coaches probably do, but not the players.
Right. And again, for those of you, that game, the winner of that game is playing Duke. So
Or in fairness, the winner of Duke in Arizona.
No. This is where we're going to talk about this game in detail, but I will go and say, we've got this. We've got this. This may not be as easy as we want, but we've got this.
All right, let's talk about the game. As you said, typically don't spend so much time on eating and drinking, but that's where we are today. So this is a matchup where you've got Duke. Duke is now the number one offense on KenPom. They've surpassed Auburn and Alabama. So you've got the number one offense taking on the number 12 offense in Arizona. And Duke is number 1 on KenPom. Arizona is 13th. And the difference really is the defense, where Duke is 4th in the defensive rating and Arizona is 28th. However, they have improved as the year has gone on. And they had a lineup out there against Oregon, which I do think these 5 guys can give Duke some issues. They had a lineup of Jaden Bradley, Caleb Love, KJ Lewis, Carter Bryant, and Tobi Aaka. And those are 5 guys who are athletic, who have, Carter Bryant's a freshman, but the other 4 guys are at least a sophomore. And we know Caleb Love, he's in his 5th year. And they're athletic, they're strong, they can defend, and they have decent positional size. And so I think those guys can give Duke some problems defensively. Now, offensively is part of the reason why I think Coach Lloyd hasn't turned to that lineup as much, because there's not, unless Caleb Love is shooting the way he was. I guess it's last night. It's still last night. Feels like a long time ago.
It feels like a long time ago because we were up late, but it really was not that long ago.
It really wasn't. It's Monday. We're recording this at 4 o'clock. I'll probably have this video out late Monday night, just so everyone is on the same page. So I was getting at is that Caleb Love, the way he shot the ball allowed them to play this lineup more than I think Coach Lloyd had liked to throughout the regular season, because he had made a switch after a few games after, in fairness, the Duke-Arizona game, where he put Anthony Del Orso into the starting lineup, who's their 3-point specialist, and he put KJ Lewis as their 6th man because he wanted to get more spacing in the starting lineup. And so Lewis comes off the bench now, but he's a really impactful slasher. He had 3 blocks at 6'4" or 6'5" in the game against Oregon. He's a really impactful defender, one of the better defenders in college basketball. I think that lineup could pose some difficulty for Duke offensively, certainly.
I think the lineup is strong. That's why I think we're going to have an outcome that'll be closer than we may have wanted. It'll be interesting when people put their score predictions in the chat, whether they agree with certainly my assessment that this will be a closer game. But watching Arizona and Oregon last night, it was a 4-5 matchup. So, we're at the point where we're starting to ratchet up the caliber of the teams we're playing against. And I have a good feeling about it. And when we beat Caleb Love, it will count for yet another win against North Carolina.
That would be 4. Yeah. Since you're on that track, does that mean that the previous Arizona win also count as a win over North Carolina? So we would be up to 5.
Well, 5.
Just over North Carolina, not NC State, not Wake Forest. If I'm just following your train of thought here. So you're saying we're 4-0 against North Carolina on the season. This would be the 5th game.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And in my crazy logic, winning both games in North Carolina to get to the Sweet 16 also counted. I'm counting everything okay. as part of the revenge tour.
All right, so I'm just trying to do a little bit of math in my head really quickly here. So we've got 5 wins over North Carolina. We've got 1 win over NC State, so we're up to 6. We had the 2 wins over Wake Forest, so that's 8. And then the 2 wins in North Carolina, or at NC State's arena, I should say. So that's 10-0. That's what we're looking to get to on Thursday night.
Absolutely, and the reason I'm counting that way is it was it's one of those things for Coach Shire when you go 0-5 against
North
the
Carolina
North
schools.
Carolina the year before. That's the
One
kind of
one
thing
in
that
five. We got one win over Wake. No, two. We had one win over Wake Forest, and we had one win over NC State.
early on in the season.
Um,
Because
Wake Forest.
the NC State NC State late in the season is when DJ started to come around. So
So what's funny about that? So Wake Forest was earlier in the season. The NC State win was, I think, the second to last regular season game, because the last regular season game is obviously North Carolina. So we had beat them, and then it was only 10 days later that they beat us handily in the ACC tournament. So that I remember that game feeling very confident. And I know this is what people want to listen to because we're supposed to be breaking down Duke versus Arizona, but that I remember going into it thinking we figured some stuff out. We had a good game plan for DJ Burns, yada yada. And it turned out NC State had figured things out, because a lot of the reason we did well in that game was our offensive rebounding, and Coach Keats took that away, and that it was bad. So to bring us back full circle, the Revenge Tour has been a lot of fun this year because there was a lot of pain last year for sure, and
I
so
think that's
Coop
that's our point.
Coop and company have made this a lot of fun, and it's and company, because national headlines talk about Cooper Flag, but the best player for Duke the first two games of the tournament has been Tyrese Proctor, and at different times of the year, it's been the best player for Duke has been Con Knipple on different games. We've gotten significant contributions from our big guys, Malawach, and as of late, Gangba. We've got our stabilizers and Sion James and Mason Gillis. And don't forget about Malik Brown, which is a great place to segue right here, because this game, Duke and Arizona, both teams from the first matchup will be missing one of their centers who played at least 20 minutes. Both guys, Brown played 24 minutes in that game. He had 3 steals. So we are going to miss Malik Brown in this one. And by the way, knowing Duke, I don't think it's going to happen, but I have to say it. There is the outside chance that that game starts and Malik Brown checks in at the 16-minute mark. I have to say it, because how many times, both ways, have we been surprised somebody didn't play and somebody did play? And so, and I'll say this, both times before Malik Brown came back, I hadn't heard anything. We had some comments of people saying Malik Brown, he's doing more in practice. He's had contact. So if anyone's heard anything about Malik, as great as Gangba's been playing, it would be great to have our full complement of players back. I don't think it's going to happen, so we're going to need Gangba to play well. But how cool would it be? It'd be like The Undertaker if he just shows up at the 16-minute mark and all of a sudden there's Malik Brown. The lights dim. There he is. So yeah, that would be fun. That would be fun.
No question about it. No question about it. They full complement.
Oh,
I thought it could go, but now things got moved up. We were a little surprised that we were not Friday, Sunday, that we're Thursday, Saturday. So didn't get the extra day of rest. I thought we would go into this weekend, and I still think we can go into this weekend without Malik Brown, but how cool would it be? Very.
right. And I got so excited with that I forgot the guy in Arizona who's not available is 7'2" Matijas Krivas, who has been injured for most of the year. After that, he played only a handful more games after the Duke game. So I think both teams, Duke, this is the third time that we've been without Malik Brown this season, and Arizona has been without Krivas for a large stretch of the season now. So both teams are well adjusted. This isn't something that they're going to have to change game plans, etc. On the Arizona side, before I head over to Duke, their point guard's Jaden Bradley. Not a great shooter, but he does do a good job of attacking the basket. He's pretty fast. He can knock down the three. It's just not necessarily like a strength of his, and he's good at getting steals. He had 3 steals in the game against Oregon, and the last player I want to make sure I touch on in their 8-man rotation, um, Carter Bryant, who I think is really the last couple of games I've seen him play as a freshman. I think he's played really well. The stats don't jump off the page, but I think he's been impactful defensively. And just his rotations, his size, he's 6'8", 220, 225. So he'll actually match up, and he's a good athlete. He'll match up well with Coop when he's on the court. And I don't know if you noticed this, JD, but at the end of the Oregon Arizona game, Aaka had 4 fouls, so they pulled him. And Biddle, the big guy for Oregon, which was interesting because Vasar is 7'1", and Aaka's only 6'8". But once Vasar came in the game, Biddle started going down to the post and going at Vasar because all of a sudden he went from Aaka, who you just can't move that guy, to Vasar, who is just he's just not very physical. And so even though he's taller, it was a better matchup. So I think when Vasar's in the game, we got to attack the basket, especially.
Since the first Arizona game, your point that we figured things out. One of the things you reminded me was that Caleb Foster was the starting guard. And at that point, we were saying, we were starting to get this drumbeat of why is this guy starting? We now have Sion James starting. We now have Gangba, who, when you check the minutes, I don't even know if he got in the game against Arizona, in which case we now have another offensive 7-foot weapon, 6'11". So it's a very different matchup, but Arizona, if you stayed up to watch the game, played a hell of a game. So did Oregon. I mean, when it's 81-80 with just a couple of minutes left and, punch for punch being thrown at each other, and they're both playing. So I think that I'll leave it for the point spread when we get to our prediction for the game.
All right. I appreciate that. By the way, we are trying to get to 1,600 subscribers by the Sweet 16. So we've got about 2 days, 2 or 3 days, depending on how you want to do the math. We need 2 more subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so.
We're down to your brother, your cousin, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whoever you have. Just make certain that they, like us and become a subscriber. Just 2.
So on the Duke side of things, I remember when I was rewatching the first game, there was a couple of times KJ Lewis, his athleticism, was able to beat Khan, slashing to the basket. And Khan, he didn't have a great game. He hit an important 3 in the second half. Cooper had a pretty miserable first half shooting wise. I think he was like 2 for 10 or 2 for 11 to start the game. And then he got it going in the second half, as he's done a lot of times this year.
You mean Cooper Flag?
Yeah, that's who I mean. That's exactly who I mean. And right now, Proctor's on a heater. He is on a heater, and we're going to see if he can keep going. Speaking of Proctor, something interesting I caught in his post-game interview. You know how we were giving him credit for pump faking, sidestep, and making the guy fly by and creating space, being cool, right? He said, and this is something I've brought up a few times, Neil Begovic told him start pump faking after he made his third 3. And the amount of times that the guys in the rotation have credited Neil Begovic or or Spencer Hubbard for helping them with their game. It's just another area where you can clearly see how connected this team is. And for Proctor, in a moment where it's all about Proctor right now, right? For him to make sure he gave the credit to that, because we were like, what great moves, his playing with such composure, and obviously he executed it, which is all him. But for him to give the credit for the idea to Begovic says a lot about him and this Duke team.
Well, there's an extra assistant coaching job on that Duke bench.
maybe Begovic will stick around. Who knows? And they move everybody up a slot. All right, other things, Duke-wise, Duke analysis. I don't know if this is the game.
I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the elbow.
I thought we had we disagreed. We agreed to disagree. I thought we had moved on, but you can't quite do it, can you?
But the comments have come back to suggest that more people noticed it the way that I did than you did. Well, in which case, I think that this is something we're going to have to look for in the game, which is how do they play Cooper Flagg? I think they're going to play him very physical. They're going to try to get him off of his rhythm. And obviously, if they can get him in foul trouble, Coop puts himself in foul trouble is the problem half the time. It's an offensive. It's some motion. The elbow that I keep making there was an elbow that I think he threw, which led to, one of his 2 fouls early on. But Cooper influences the game in so many different ways. And I think as we start to break down each of the Duke players for this game, I think it's going to pose more problems than Arizona can deal with, because there's just, especially with the way that Proctor is playing over the last 3 games, they can no longer just say, well, Proctor will get his. They can't do that anymore. They now have to design someone to go out there and guard him, leaving Cooper Flagg most likely, one-on-one, not, it would have been 2-on-1 on Cooper Flagg in most instances. They can't afford to do that. I mean, if they say, well, if, Proctor gets 29 points, similar to Caleb Foster, Caleb Love, oh, well, I don't think they can afford to play the game that way, the way that Proctor is playing right now.
Well, he's certainly
Proctor. Sorry,
he's certainly not the guy to help off of. The guy to help off of on Duke would be Sion James, as we talked about in the post game last time. And I think it was Joe who said, last time somebody tried that, he hit a couple of threes against North Carolina. He started the Illinois game like that. So it may not work out too well. The thing I'm curious about for Arizona, by the way, putting the elbow to the side, everything you said is what teams have been doing for a while now. They try to be physical with them. They try to make it, a muck, kind of like muck it up. We saw, I think the team weirdly that did the best was NC State, who turned a game that was supposed to be, it was like Dontrez Styles was doing a good job of just being really physical with Cooper. And they turned that into a very close game. A few other things happened. The thing I'm curious about for Arizona is I think the two best guys to guard Cooper are KJ Lewis and Carter Bryant, who've come off the bench for Arizona. So I wonder if they're going to make a starting lineup change, because there's a big gap between those two guys and the next, who would be Trey Townsend, who starts. I don't think it's a great matchup for Townsend. He is experienced. It is his 5th year, but he's just not as athletically gifted as those other two guys, especially Lewis. I think Lewis is the right guy for Arizona to put on Flagg. For Duke, I think it's important for them to space the floor against Arizona, and I'm curious if I think it's this game or the next, but one of these two games, Isaiah Evans is going to hit 3 3-pointers at least. He'll get 9 points. And it's just a matter of which game is it going to be. I'm kind of leaning towards the next game because whoever it would be, BYU or Alabama, not great defensive teams. So I think there'll be more openings for Isaiah Evans. I think Arizona is a bit better, but having said that, they did just give up 82 points to Oregon. So it's
83. Yeah.
83 points. It's not like they're Houston or Tennessee, So there will be space, especially when Arizona has Del Orso on the court. He's not a great defender. Vesar's not a great defender, and that means guys have to rotate, and there are opportunities. So I'm looking for Isaiah Evans to get some threes. I'm looking for Gillis to build off of his 2 threes. I think we're going to see a more complete and balanced scoring effort from Duke, and that means that Flag will have, yes, he's going to have to score, but I think he's most importantly distribute. I think he's going to get sometimes where he's got 2 people on him, or he's going to beat his guy and he'll get the hockey assist. But I think it's going to be important that Flag's able to get everyone involved as he typically does.
Do you think Caleb Foster is the 7th guy in again? I mean, is he moved up in the rotation to that point?
I do. I think the way he's played, I don't see any reason why you would change it. Now, the reason would be matchups, but I think you've got in Arizona Jaden Bradley and Caleb Love. Love's a bit bigger, but Bradley is a smaller. He's not small. He's 6'2" or 6'3", but a quicker guard. And typically we've brought Foster in against teams with the smaller, quicker guards because he's able to match up better. So I think that could be the case in this one. I think it's another time where, as we've said, as Coach Shire said throughout the season, even when he wasn't playing well, we're gonna need him at some point. And he's played well in these first 2 tournament games. He had some good minutes in the ACC tournament. He had a good second half in that North Carolina game just before the ACC tournament. So I do think he will still be the 7th man.
Okay. All right. I was just checking in on the rotation. I think that Proctor scoring in the last 3 games, going back to the ACC championship, has been, they have to plan on guarding him. Who's their best defensive guard, Jack?
Jane Bradley.
And do you like the matchup?
He can do a good job. He is a good defensive guard. So I think it just depends on how they want him to guard Proctor, but he can certainly follow him around. But if they're guarding, to your point earlier, if they're guarding Proctor like almost like, I mean, the way he's been shooting, kind of like a Steph Curry, where you're trying to deny him the ball, that means everyone else gets to play 4-on-4. And I like our chances playing 4-on-4. When 2 of those 4 are Con Knipple and Cooper. I mean, it's Con Knipple, Cooper Flag, and Sion James, 3 great decision makers. And then you've got the lob threat with Malawach, which changes the way that you have to guard him. And so I think no matter what, Arizona's going to have to, they have to give up something. And just a question of, will Duke be able to make them pay for it? And I don't think it's the same on the other end of the court. I think Duke, they can focus in on the 3-point shooting of Caleb Love, who's very up and down, and Del Orso, who that's really all he does. He's a 3-point shooter. But the rest of the team they can hit threes, but they're not great shooters. And so I think if Duke can make the other guys have to shoot threes, I'm sure they'll hit a couple, but it's not really what they love to do. It's not their strength. And so that's where I think Duke's defense will have the advantage in this one.
All right. What do you think about the score?
I've got Well, all right. I just want to make sure because last time you copied my offensive homework. You took my
All right. Do you
85 points.
do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go. Yeah, good idea. Go first this time. I've got mine written down, so I won't change it.
I do too. I just made one slight alteration. Duke 89 and uh and Arizona 84. It's a 5-point
Wow.
win. And I would have initially been until I watched last night that made me think that this is not the Arizona team we played the first time. This is an Arizona team that fought off a 19-4, gut punch. It's an Arizona team that fought off a surge at the end of the game to still win the game 87-83. They were up by 6, actually. So Duke wins by 5, but it may be that it's one of those where they were up 7-11 at that point, because I think it's going to be closer to the 10-point margin, but I think their constant offensive effort will just make the score a little bit closer than it really was. So, but I'm going to say it's a 5-point game, 89-84.
All right, I like this
High
because we
high
are.
high high scoring game.
I like this because we are actually kind of far apart here, which is cool. So, so the first game is important for me. First game, even though I think both teams are much better, 69-55 Duke. I went with Duke 78, Arizona 65. I think it's a lower scoring game. And I think Duke's defense allows them to separate a bit as the game goes on because I think their interior defense will make it tough for Arizona. And if Caleb Love isn't going crazy, which I don't think he will be, they're going to have a tough time scoring consistently. And I, on the same token, I think Arizona can do some things with their athleticism to limit Duke to only 78 points, which is still pretty good in college game, but not the 90 points that they've been putting up in their first two games.
Well, certainly the 89. I think they're going to continue, being around that 90-point mark. But I think that Arizona is just going to try to rain threes on them, and occasionally, if the three isn't open, they'll look to get it inside and drive to the basket, which they were very effective doing last night. So that's why I think it'll be. I'm very confident. Don't anyone read into this. I'm very confident that we're going to win this game. It just may be a little bit closer at the end point total. That's all.
I think one of the differences in comparison um, is I think while Malawach he's gonna have a tough time with Awaka on the glass. I don't think that's gonna change, but I think where Malawach his impact will be felt will be when the other guys, the guards and the forwards, drive to the basket. I think Malawach is it's not his shot blocking, but his deterrence. Just the guy is enormous. And when he puts his arms up, he's close to 10-foot standing reach. I don't know how close, but he's close. And so
Close.
I think that's where his impact will be most notable. And so I think it will be hard for Arizona to score. But we shall see. We shall see Thursday night somewhere between 9:39 and 10 o'clock is my prediction. I think it will be 10 o'clock. That's my guess. Um, any parting thoughts, JD?
Before we sign off, remember to like
Like,
us.
drop a comment. Want to hear from you guys. Subscribe to the channel and share it with a friend. We will see you guys after the Arizona game. Peace.